got a nutritionist who looks after me, takes care of me, my diet, and he works with a lot of the top athletes. He works with Haggerty and he works with a lot of the Venom guys.
I've only opened my eyes to a whole new world of nutrition recently.
We've got a really good guy on board with the team. He looks after a lot of the top guys, a lot of the guys that are coming up as well.
Pete at Condition Nutrition is very, very good.
Pete from Condition Nutrition.
Pete, who works on Condition Nutrition.
Well, if you haven't guessed it, we are speaking with the nutritionist that the pros swear by. Peter Miller from Condition Nutrition is here today, and he's giving you all his best tips on fueling your fight right. Let's go. Can you share some insight into how you got into nutrition coaching for fighters? Because I understand you were a chef before.
Yeah, and I'd always been interested in sports. Always played all sports as a kid. I ended up doing a sports science degree. Did a sports science degree, then ended up going into doing a master's in sports nutrition and physiology. When you typically, what a lot of people tend to do when they finish the degree, think I'm going to start working with elite athletes and people, and it doesn't quite work out like that first. It's quite difficult. So I set up my condition nutrition business about 7 or 8 years ago, and it wasn't only till the last 2.5 years that actually I've been working with athletes. It took a long process, and it's quite funny how I landed working with fighters, because I wasn't planning on just specifically working with fighters originally. I just wanted to work with all different types of athletes, and just the more and more fighters that came to me, the more my passion grew more and more for this area, and I just niched it down, and then I just work with only predominantly fighters now. So it's pretty crazy how things work out and how your passion for something grows over time.
So were you nervous starting with fighters?
Yeah, well, I had a couple of friends who competed in MMA and boxing. So when I was younger, when I was doing my degree, I gave them like nutritional advice. So I, from an early stage, knew the processes in regards to fight week and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's a lot of things, especially my work, is just trial and error and experience. The more experience you get, the more fighters you work with, the more you kind of know the telltale signs, and know even simple things like emotions, what language to use when you're in fight week, and how to, put your point across. And but that's just all come from just continuously working with fighters and getting that experience in.
So it's really interesting that you mentioned emotions. Are there any foods that you've come across that help with mindset and emotions and keeping someone sharp in their mind and not just their body?
That's a good question. In terms of just in general, I was like, eating a well-balanced diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, they're getting enough carbohydrates for training, they're being fuel for the training sessions and sleep and recovery. What ends up happening is a lot of fighters is they've got too big of a weight cut, so the food portions go down, the food quality goes down, and then they're very cranky throughout fight camp, they're not sleeping well, the mindset, they're a little bit down, a little bit depressed, and it's just a domino effect of just getting the right nutrition from the start and competing at the right weight class. That can make your whole fight camp experience a bit easier. But it's always on the likes of fight week. It's never an easy process, but my job is to try and make it as simple as possible. I did a chef qualification, so with that chef qualification, that's kind of given me a better insight into flavors, and that's really important for fight week, where you're not just giving the fighter boiled chicken and eggs. You can give them something flavorful, and that whole psychology of fight week is a lot easier for them.
Actually, Amber was mentioning that you gave her pizza and burgers sometimes, and she was shocked.
I'm always being creative and thinking, right, what can we do? Because obviously there's different strategies that you use on fight week. Typically, you'll lower carb. So I'll look at a recipe and go, this is a low carb dish. What can I do to make that recipe better? What can I add flavor wise, which will still hit the weight loss target, but obviously make the meal enjoyable? So there's always little things like that. And I think being in the kitchen and learning that trade definitely helps with that creativity. Just knowing little things here and there, just adding one extra spice or adding some chopped tomatoes or something like that with the meat. Just that little change can just make that whole process a lot more enjoyable. As I said, the psychology, if you're going into fight week and you're having meatballs, you're having steak and eggs and chicken, flavoursome instead of the typical old school, very little things, no flavour, and then it just feels pretty shit.
Miserable, right? So how do you approach quick weight cuts? Is that something you're comfortable doing?
There's so many factors that influence my decision whether to take someone on in that scenario. One, what's the time frame? They got 1 week, 2 weeks, what have they been eating in the weeks previous? So say someone comes to me, and this happens quite a lot on Instagram, say, Peter, I'm 2 weeks out, I've got 10 kilos to lose. And then the first thing I'll be like, okay, well, you got to find out what they've been doing previously. I try and get as much information for fighters that I work with. Like we get body comp assessments, blood work, because I want to make sure that I'm given the right plan and it's right for you and you're competing also at the right weight class. Because a big thing with combat sports is someone in the gym goes, oh, Joe competes at 70 kilos and he walks around at 85. Well, why does he fight at 70? Oh, he's just always fought at 70. That doesn't really give a lot of it. He could be competing at the wrong weight class for years and years, pushing his body too far, whereas he could have a lot more of a comfortable fight camp just by competing a couple of extra kilos higher. Just them little differences. So it's just getting that data, which also with combat sports, it's a lot of passed down information. Did it this way, so did it that way. And the research hasn't been evolving that much in combat sports over the years. But now with the likes of the UFC, PI, there's a lot more research coming out. So it's dispelling myths on what water load and hot bath. So you can look at the research and, you know, it's a bit of a guiding light to follow instead of a lot of the times what fighters do over the years. It's just guesswork. It's what someone else has done in the gym and what someone else has done. So it's a pretty interesting space to be in right now.
It sounds like it. And I'm super interested. I'm very keen, like my audience, to hear more about that. Because oftentimes, too, in one championship, you hear the commentators when the fighters are walking in, for instance, both Amber Kitchen and Jonathan Haggerty, and I know they're clients of yours, when they walked in, both of them commented right away. They're like, wow, the nutrition must have been on point for this camp. What were you doing differently with them?
I think with especially with Amber, we worked together a couple of weeks out from her second to last fight. So I only had a couple of weeks to work with it. And then this time around, we had a good solid around 6 months working together. So we made some really good changes over that time period, making sure she's fueled for training, also working on body composition goals. So I think it's just the consistency of being on a plan, which showed with Amber's obviously physique and energy levels. And same with John, really. It's people at that level. It's just the consistency of following some kind of structure. What a lot of people at a lower level do is they'll be good for 6 weeks, go off for 2-3 months, binge on a lot of food, come back, and then they're in the same boat again. So it's just having that consistency and that having that time with Amber now. And she's always on a plan with me now. You know, she doesn't necessarily follow it to the absolute T every minute, every day, but she's got structure there to follow, even when she's out of fight camp.
So about the structure, let's talk about that a little bit. And you mentioned just a couple questions back, you were talking about how sometimes people are doing low carb or low small portions.
I think one of the big myths is the ketogenic diet. And I think there's a bit of a crossover where that's come from like general population sector where it works for them in terms of weight loss. And that's kind of moved into the sports space. And people think, oh, a ketogenic diet's good for weight loss. But the ketogenic diet for a fighter is probably the worst diet you could adopt for a couple of reasons. Carbohydrates is the main source of energy for doing any type of high intensity activity. You know, you're hitting pads, you're sparring, that's fueled by carbohydrates. So if you're having a ketogenic diet over a long period of time, you're not going to hit them high power outputs in training. And I like to give an example. It's like giving unleaded petrol or diesel into a NASCAR or Formula One car. The car will most likely go at the start, but then probably a couple of blocks away, it'll just gas out. And that's what I think the ketogenic diet is like for the fighters. And it goes back to the thing of, oh, so adopted a ketogenic diet for his weight cut and, you know, it worked for him. But that elite level, the fine margins between winning and losing and, you know, what sometimes 1-2%, it may work for someone at a really low level where there's so many variables that can influence performance. But at that elite level, that 1-2%, the ketogenic diet is not good. It's a big thing with my job. It's a lot of debunking myths and trying to educate people in the right way. I think also is what we go back to before about to lose weight, you have to eat plain, boring foods. That's the only way to do it. And that's just not the case, as you said about with Amber, having burgers, pizzas, people have burritos on my plan, paellas, curries, everything. And as long as they're in that calorie range, that's important. And there's a principle I like to incorporate called the 3-2-1 principle. So it's a simple template to follow for anyone who is trying to determine what carbohydrates you should have or protein or fat. So 3-2-1 principle is 3 grams per kilogram of body mass in carbohydrates. So say you weigh 70 kilos, for example, you times that by 3, 210 grams of carbs for the day. Then protein is 2 grams per kilo. So once again, 70 times 2, and then fat, 70 times 1. And that's a good kind of baseline to go off if you're in a fight camp scenario. And then what you can do to track if them calories are working for you, just track your weight each week. If you're losing too much weight, then we go, okay, we can increase the carbs a little bit. You know, if you're losing not enough weight, we can drop things down. So it's tweaking things in there, but that's a simple template to follow for people out to camp. And also, especially with training days, you've got a really hard sparring session that day. You go, okay, well, we need a little bit more carbohydrates that day. But then, for example, on a Sunday, it might be a rest recovery day. we need to drop it down a little bit more. Maybe we need to have 2 grams per kilogram of carbohydrates. I'm doing kilograms, it's pounds in America, isn't it? I just realized.
Yeah. So that's an interesting structure. Would you say that that is more for people who are training really hard, though?
If you're training a couple of times, say you're doing an evening session or you're training once a day, something like that is still a decent structure to follow. I think one of the most important things is the carbohydrates. If you're having carbohydrates to fuel your training sessions, so you look at it as if you're having a big training session, more emphasis on having more carbohydrates. If you're not, you don't really need them carbohydrates, so you could increase the protein a little bit, increase the fat. And it's always tracking your weight, seeing if that works for you, because as you know yourself, it's not one size fits all. It's basically just seeing what works for you in your everyday life, and in fight camp, you can adjust them accordingly.
I wanted to talk a little bit about supplements, and not the synthesized ones, but more so the food ones that are out there, because that's kind of a hot topic now too. What are your thoughts on that?
My opinion on things like that is, if you enjoy taking that, if you feel like you enjoy having liver, or by all means have it. It's nutrient rich. But if it's a chore for you to have that and you dread having things like that, I don't see there being any point in doing that, because you make it goes back to the thing where you're having food you don't enjoy. You've got to have a good relationship with food. So if you like them foods, by all means.
I don't know if many people do, but it's kind of like, it's kind of a trend. You're seeing these people cooking these livers and they're really forcing them into their diet. Now there's supplement pills that you can just take to make it easier. Is there any benefit to that?
So I know the livers, it's a very good source of iron having that. But in terms of taste, I think if you don't enjoy it, there's better ways of structuring your nutrition to get them nutrients in. You shouldn't dread taking something, because people's adherence to having that food goes down. If you don't enjoy having something long term, you're not going to stick to it.
Now, you've worked with Liam Harrison, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so the main thing with Liam is everyone's just astounded at his energy levels. How do you keep those on point? He's generating so much energy. It's like I was watching Joe Rogan, he made that point where it was like, you're just generating incredible amounts of energy. Is that just something that he has naturally, or is that something that you think food is helping him with?
I think a lot of it comes from just natural talent and he's had the 100+ fights and he's done 100+ training camps. So I think you see him on the pads, he always gives 110% to his training levels. To go and just to see someone at that level and who's been around the sport for so long and providing them with nutrition support, and as we mentioned before about them 1-2% improvements in training, then 1-2% improvements in energy levels, and it was pretty awesome to see the impact that I was having on his training, and he made weight comfortably, and it was pretty cool to see. And he's just an absolute savage. He just gives everything to all his training sessions.
I know, really fun to watch. So you mentioned making weight safely. Is there ever any moments where you're kind of like, I hope they make weight, and then you're just kind of like, when they do?
Even if it's someone cutting 1 kilo or 2 pounds, it's still a nervous experience for me, because just from having my science head on and knowing that you're always thinking of the potential worst case scenario. So every weight cut scenario I'm in, I've always got a slight feeling of anxiousness, but I think that just comes part of the job. And it's crazy to see like some guys that I work with, they've done it before, and they're calm, relaxed, and I'm deep down sometimes thinking, sometimes quite, especially with it's a big event, the world title fight, there's always that element of nervousness around it, but it is kind of relief when they make weight and then sitting there and they're eating drinking the fluids, eating the food, and they're happy again. Yeah, job done.
Exactly. Like pat on the back. I did that.
I sometimes go for a lie down when I've been in one championship. I'll be like, it's done. I'm going for a lie down now.
So do you accompany them on their fight trips just to keep them on track?
If it can, yeah. So I'm moving to Thailand in about 2.5 weeks now. So I'm going to be doing a few one events. So that's the thing with my job. I do majority of my work online, but it's such a different scenario when you're there in person. The emotions, I was talking about, just the whole energy, and you learn something new every time. A little snippet. What can we do to make things a little bit better the following time? And so to it, I try and go to as much as I can. So I'm going to be there for quite a few now, and John's fights and stuff like that. So it'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, that'll be really exciting. A lot of cool fights coming up in one. Are there any new fighters that you're working with?
I'm trying to think who's competing in the next few weeks. I've got Smilla Sundell. She's competing in 4 weeks' time. So yeah, I'll be over there for that. Got a couple of new like Rise and One Championship stars coming up, like Johan Ghazali. We've got Nabil from Venom. So got quite an exciting array of talent coming through now. On like I've got about 15, 16 One Championship roster fighters at the moment. It's pretty cool at the moment. Pretty busy, but it's good.
Yeah, that sounds really busy. So then on that note, you're so focused on everyone else and you have this large roster of fighters. How do you manage your own nutrition?
I'm one of the people where I can eat the same food every day and not complain about it. I'm a man of habits where I like a routine. So I go to the gym same time every morning. I'll eat the same thing with breakfast, same thing for lunch, sometimes vary it for dinner. I don't particularly track my food, but from doing it for so long, I have an idea of what I'm having just from experience, really. So I don't train anything for anything specific. I just do bit of cardio, bit of weights. That's why I'm looking forward to going to Thailand to do a bit of training out there. And I'm the same with like the way I treat my fighters. Like, I'm 80-90% consistent the majority of the time. You know, sometimes on the weekends I may go out and have a buffalo chicken burger or something like that. You know, but I just make sure I'm consistent the majority of the time.
Nice. I think consistency is so key. And a lot of people don't understand that if you just make it a lifestyle, you don't have to ever be miserable. So what's the strangest food you've ever eaten?
Thing that comes to my mind was camel. I had camel in Australia.
Okay.
I was camping in the outback on a tour and it was camel burgers for dinner. And the only thing I can describe it is just imagine a beef burger, but like the fattiest version of a beef burger you could ever. It was absolutely disgusting. It was horrible, but it wasn't my thing. Oh, crocodile as well. I think camel was worse than crocodile, to be fair.
Okay, what was crocodile like?
A bit like chicken, mixture between chicken and fish, like a white fish.
It's not too bad.
It wasn't too bad, to be fair.
Camel sounds disgusting. So sorry, I just have to linger on that for a second. How did they dress that burger?
I think like it was, from what I can remember, it was just a normal burger with lettuce, tomatoes, onion.
Okay, interesting. I guess like, were there any surprises with any of your clients that you've ever worked with?
I've had a few funny, well, kind of funny weight cut scenarios I could tell you about.
Okay.
So we were in Germany for the guys fighting for the world title fight, Joe Craven, who's actually in Liam Harrison's gym, good friends with Liam, and we were cutting weight in the bath. And what ends up happening, this happened quite a few times, is you monitor the temperature, but because it's a hotel bath, the temperature can be a bit problematic and go up and down. So Joe wasn't sweating enough in the bath, so we need a different strategy now. So we looked into saunas, where there's a local sauna, just to get, because sauna's a bit of a quicker process. And we went to a sauna across the road. We paid to get in, paid for a day pass, and as we walked in, I looked around, like, why is everybody naked? And it was a naked sauna. It was a naked spa. So like it was a weird client experience going to a naked spa with to cut.
So did you do it with him?
I didn't do it.
Okay.
I had shorts on and I sat outside, but everyone was looking at me like, why is this guy in shorts? And it was the only way I can explain it. It was so busy. There was like 300 people there, and there was the bar staff. Everyone was just completely naked. I had no idea what was going on.
So even the staff.
Even the staff.
Okay. I guess there's a demand for that.
It was one of them moments I thought, this is one to remember in the weight cutting experience.
That's definitely an experience that's memorable. Were there any more funny scenarios that you're willing to share?
I've had one when I was in Dubai for a weight cut, and there's water system. There's something wrong with the water system, and we were in the bath, and the bath water was yellow, completely. So it looked like he looked like he peed himself in the bath.
That's gross. I don't know if I'd be able to get into a bath if it was yellow.
Yeah, it was like one of
trooper.
Yeah, we had no choice because there was nowhere to go, so he had to sit in the bath. So it's just one, because that's the thing with the weight cut. I know, like I make a couple of jokes about it, but there's always a scenario where if you're away, something goes wrong, or like, so even something little will happen where you'd have to change it. You can plan it to a T, and then you can go out there and something like that will happen, or the bath doesn't get warm enough, or you have to go to a sauna, or there was something wrong with the sauna times are closing early for the day for some random reasons. Just all little things just they happen on them trips.
You always have to be equipped with something in your back pocket, those contingencies.
Yeah. You always have to have like a bit of a backup plan, and that's the thing we're talking about experience. When you've done it so many times now, you kind of expect them scenarios. All them scenarios have happened. I've done them now. I kind of know like how to combat that. Any possible weight cut scenarios happen now, so I'm prepared.
Back to what you were talking about, sitting in the saunas. How important do you think that is? Is that always like a critical part of your process?
In terms of like for the final weight cut, I go backtrack a little bit in terms of the sauna. I always do a thing what's called heat acclimation for fighters. I always stress about doing heat acclimation. Basically, what heat acclimation is adapting to the heat. So you can do it two ways. You can heat acclimatization, which is going to an actual warm climate and adapting to the heat, or acclimation is in a setting where it's like a sauna or a bath, or you're doing some kind of exercise. So I look at it in a scenario where, say, a fighter's they know they've got to cut a couple of kilos in water for that final cut. So what can we do to make that process a lot easier for you? So with the heat acclimation, we get them at the start of camp to just do, a couple of sessions a week in the sauna, or have a hot bath a couple of sessions a week, and then we monitor their sweat rates and their overall comfort. So the scenario where, say, I assume Toronto is quite cold in the winter. It's pretty cold in the winter, isn't it?
Yes.
So say you're cutting weight in the winter and you haven't been exposed to any heat since the summer, and you jump in that sauna and you're going to think, wow, this is really hot, really uncomfortable. If you've been doing heat acclimation, doing them sauna sessions in the week previous, you've already experienced that heat. So you're used to it. You've stayed in that sauna for a long period. So when you get in that sauna or bath, you're like, this is quite easy. So what ends up, the adaptations, what happen with heat acclimation is you sweat quicker, you lose less electrolytes in your sweat, you get less of an increase in your heart rate, your core temperature's lower. So all them cardiovascular strains from what you get from dehydrating yourself are a lot lower. So then the overall comfort of that experience is a lot better. So I've seen massive impacts of doing that, for doing heat acclimation without fight camp. So someone be doing it for 8 weeks. They typically take 2 hours to lose 2 kilos. May only take them an hour now. So it speeds up the process. So that's a big thing I try and implement with fighters, is if you're going to be cutting some water weight at the final stage of the weight cut, start getting in that sauna and gradually increasing the intensity, durations. Say you can only manage 10-15 minutes in the sauna week 1 of camp, the next week push it to 20 minutes, next week 25, just gradually increase it, and that will make a massive difference for you.
How long in general for, like, let's say a beginner fighter?
So heat acclimation usually takes around 7 to 14 heat exposure sessions. So say you're doing it 2-3 times a week in an 8-week camp, you'll be heat acclimated by, trying to do maths here, I'm terrible at maths, you'll be pretty much heat acclimated by week 4 or 5. And also with the sauna, it's a good recovery method once you finish training, or on a rest day, go in the sauna. So got a lot of benefits doing the heat acclimation. It's something that I absolutely stress to my fighters. I get them to record how much they sweat, because with that data we can go, okay, well, he's losing 500 grams in 20 minutes. So we know if he's got 1.5 kilos to lose on that final bit, it's only going to take him X amount of time. So it's just using that data and being a bit clever, so we've got everything nailed in.
Very interesting. I have never even heard that explained to that depth. That's really, really, really cool. Now, you mentioned a little bit about losing your electrolytes and hydration. What's just kind of like a very general and simple rule of thumb for people to follow in terms of hydration? Because some people overhydrate and then some people underhydrate. How do they know that they're hydrating adequately for their training?
I think one of the things that a lot of people do is they do a hard training session, for example, and they just swill back water. So water is probably one of the worst rehydration solutions, but it's not great. So always adding electrolytes to your rehydration drink, because when you sweat, you lose, say, the water and electrolyte balance in your body is like this. Mm-hmm. So when you sweat, you lose water and electrolytes. So say that goes down, but you lose more water than electrolytes. So say that goes a little bit lower. But once you introduce pure water, that goes right up, but you're not replacing electrolytes. So what ends up happening is a lot of people, the kidneys filter that water because there's too much water, and you end up urinating quite a lot of that out. So a big mistake what people do is they finish training, let's get a litre of water, boom, chug it back, and then 30 minutes later they need the toilet, and they're thinking, why do I need to go to the toilet? I've been sweating quite a lot in my training session. So that places a big importance of electrolytes, especially in training session. In general day-to-day life, I try and go for the baseline. Is you got to have like 2-3 litres as a baseline for the day. If you haven't, same thing as what we're talking about with the carbohydrates, if you're having a really hard training session and you're quite a heavy sweater, then you need to bump it up a little bit more. What you can do to track it a little bit better is you could weigh yourself before your training session, weigh yourself after, and then replace what you've lost by 1.5. So say you've lost 1 kilo in your training session, you drink 1.5 litres of fluid. And then what we spoke about, adding the electrolytes to the fluid too, also drinking it slowly can help retain that fluid. I hope I answered your question then, sorry.
Oh, no, you did. Definitely. More than. So is there something to be said about the quality of electrolyte and the ratio of electrolyte? Because I know there's different things in those mixes. Sometimes there's potassium, sodium, and then a lot of people run to the generic Gatorades and this and that. And I never have electrolytes. Sometimes I have intra-workout, and I know that's very common with a lot of other people, but I don't feel like I'm necessarily being that fully hydrated. So that's maybe other people are feeling and will resonate with. What electrolytes do you think are most important, and how do I approach that?
Yeah, so determining whether you're picking a good electrolyte brand is when you sweat, the main electrolyte lost in your sweat is sodium. So sodium's got to be the focal point of that electrolyte solution. So also main ingredients in like electrolyte solution is potassium, but you don't lose a lot of potassium in your sweat, it's sodium. So you've got to look at the label and go, okay, if the potassium content is higher than the sodium content, typically you'd want to avoid that. It's always got to be, say, minimum per serving around 300-400 milligrams of sodium, but it's all that sodium's got to be the focal point of the electrolyte solution. For example, like I don't want to call them out, like the Prime hydration drinks. The Prime drinks are the same, the hydration drinks, but the sodium content is very, very small and the potassium content is really high, and they promote that it's a good hydration solution. It's not. So rule of thumb, always look for the sodium. If the sodium content's higher than potassium, good to go.
Awesome.
Gatorade for people who are not really training hard. If you're just doing an hour session in the gym, there's not really much emphasis on having a Gatorade drink. If you're doing hard sparring, or you're doing something of real high intensity over the duration of say a couple of hours, then a Gatorade's pretty useful because it's got a reasonable amount of sodium in it, and also carbohydrates can help retain fluid too. So when there's carbohydrates in the drink, it can help retain the fluid in your body. But whereas if you're just having the pure water, that just goes straight out your stomach and you end up urinating a lot of that out.
TikTok on our account, somebody wanted to know nutrition around a female's menstrual cycle, if there are any adjustments that you've seen that help with that time of month.
See, the research has actually shown there's not that many specific recommendations for different stages of the cycle. So there's been a bit of research with female fighters. Are carbohydrate recommendations different from the early phase of the cycle to the late phase? And there's no research to suggest that you should alter any kind of carbohydrate intake, protein intake, fat intake. The only thing that would be concerned going back to say a fighter would be different phases of the cycle have different dynamic in terms of core temperature. So typically the luteal phase of the cycle, the later phase of the cycle, you get an increase in core temperature. So your set point is higher. So it's around 0.5 degree higher. So if you look at in that scenario, if you're doing any kind of weight cut and your core temperature's at a higher point and you're cutting a decent amount of weight, you're at a greater risk of getting any kind of heat stroke, heat illness. That's the only kind of thing you could look out for. But in terms of food recommendations, the research just isn't there at the moment.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's all for today. Massive thank you goes out to Peter Miller for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving us a like, hitting that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.